Brewster here, and this is the 1970s phase craze. And in the 70s, there was definitely an explosion, a revolution of phaser and phase, effects in rock music and popular music. And really, like every 10 or 15 years, there's an explosion of something new or a resurgence of something from the past. Like in the 60s, there was a fuzz guitar explosion. The 70s, definitely a phase craze. Also some flanger, kind of sneaking in. The 80s definitely were dominated by chorus. Definitely there's a lot of, 80s songs with chorus effects. And the 90s was kind of a culmination of a lot of different things. It had a big wah comeback and a fuzz comeback, phaser and chorus and stuff. So it's really interesting to notice, like in different decades of music, certain habits or trends or, certain things that popped up. And like about 10 years ago, like with the gent metal, explosion, it seemed like everybody was playing 8-string guitars, and then that phase kind of came and went. And I've noticed a lot of those players are now back to playing, 6-string guitars. So this is, very common. But in the 70s, phase was a new effect. Technically, it was introduced, in the late 60s, but it really erupted and exploded in the 1970s, and that's what this lesson is going to focus on. So to begin this lesson the right way, here's the early history of phase effects and phase pedals, for guitarists. And technically, I know it's really controversial, but the first phase pedal was technically the Uni-Vibe. And I know a lot of people want to think of that as a vibrato pedal or a chorus pedal, but the characteristics and what it actually does to your signal, it's technically like the first phase pedal. So I don't know if they didn't really realize what they'd created. But here's an image with the early kind of history of phasers and phase pedals. And then here's an image to actually help you see what these phase pedals look like, because there are, some reissues and things, but the original, 70s phase pedals look something like this. And then with the attempt to settle this argument that's been ongoing ever since phase was introduced, but there's been this ongoing argument about the Uni-Vibe and phase effects. And really, like I mentioned earlier, the Uni-Vibe really is a phase pedal, let's be honest here. As badly as people want to, claim it's a chorus or a vibrato unit, it technically is a phase pedal. And here's a quote from the JHS show. And those guys are experts over at JHS, so I trust, their opinion and their comment right here. But check out this quote from JHS. Now, for most people, when they think of phase, they think of Eddie Van Halen, and that's definitely my introduction to this effect, was listening to Van Halen and wondering, like, hey, how is Eddie getting that sound, pretty much on that first Van Halen album, but it did pop up, in some random places on other albums, but Van Halen 1 totally has, Phase 90 all over it. And if you're curious, which we're not really going to hit the Van Halen side of using phaser, I've already done that. And there's actually an Edward Van Halen, episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants. And if you want to dive into Eddie's use of the Phase 90, check out that episode. And the image you're searching for looks something like this. So we're going to dive pretty deep in this episode, and I've done a lot of research and work, putting this together. So here's an image with some songs from the 70s that feature phase and phase effects. And it could be, the entire band, using phaser. It could be just the guitar. It could be the drums, it could be the vocals or something. You can definitely hear it in keyboard and Fender Rhodes and bass, and you can find, phase effects everywhere. Listen to the first, Kiss Alive album, and Peter Criss's drum solo during 100,000 Years has phase on it. So phasers everywhere in the 70s, but this is going to help you kind of find some of those elusive songs that use phase. It's not just the 1970s. You can find phaser used, all over the place. So here's an image with more modern rock songs using phaser. And by the word modern, I mean basically more recent than the 1970s. So some of these songs are from the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s or whatever. But, songs that feature phaser after the 1970s. But check this out. Let's dive even deeper. Let's look for albums that actually feature a lot of phase. And here's an image with some famous albums that feature a lot of phase. It may not necessarily be every song, but if you start, listening to some of these albums, you're going to hear Phase 90 and maybe the, Maestro phase shifter or some of these different things, the small stone, of course. But check this out. Now, truthfully, I almost turned this episode into a chord play episode because there's going to be a lot of examples in music and a lot of chord work in this episode. But I did decide to turn it into a rant video because we're going to be talking about phase. I just, flashed a bunch of images and kind of helped everybody get their, their footing and their bearing as far as what we're talking about. That way you can hear it, you can find it, you can learn some of those songs, you can listen to them, obviously. But I think this approach is really going to be interesting because we're going to actually look at music that has a phase effect, or at least guitar music, and it really does kind of show like the character and the tone and the sound of this swirly, whooshy, guitar effect. And as far as the phase pedals that are going to be featured in this episode, I set this up similar to how I did the fuzz pedal freakout, the recent episode I made, and I wanted to actually show like which pedal I'm turning on or using and manipulating, some of the knobs and switches. And that way you can actually see. That way it's not all invisible, on the floor. I wanted to actually put this right here in your face. But we're going to basically look at the MXR Uni-Vibe, which, like I mentioned, it was technically the first phase pedal. But the Uni-Vibe, also the new MXR Deep Phase, and the MXR Phase 95, which I featured that before. That was technically featured in the Van Halen, Brewster's Millions of Rants. But those are the three pedals we're going to feature here. I'm going to play, some music and some songs and kind of help you really get an earful of phase and phase effects. And one more thing, but this is important. The Phase 95 from MXR actually has 4 different settings. And you can have like the Phase 45, which is a 2-stage phaser. And then there's also the script logo setting. So there's 2 different settings for the Phase 45. And you can flip it to the Phase 90 setting, and you can have regular or the script logo. So there's technically 4 phase pedals in one, which I'm a big fan of this pedal. But you have, 2-stage phasing and 4-stage phasing. And then with the Deep Phase, which is their new pedal, there's a 4-stage phase and an 8-stage phase. So it's really cool to have both of these pedals, and you have 2, 4, and 8-stage phasing at your fingertips. The opening, that's Wild as the Wind from David Bowie, and that features, a very prominent phase effect during that guitar part. And, without the phaser turned on, it sounds like this. And then when I turn on this Phase 95, which it's on the Phase 90 setting, it sounds like this. Syrupy, kind of swirly warble to it, and you can really hear it with those chords. And speaking of chords, so that's an A minor add 9 right there in the beginning, and then just A minor, and then you're going to move down to A minor over G right there. It's A minor add 9 over G, and then A minor over G. So it's really cool the way those chords kind of twist and mutate. That syrupy phase the whole time. And then it changes to an implied F sharp 11 right there, or F11. And then D minor 7 right there. It starts with D minor 6, and then D minor 7, and then a D minor 7 bar chord. And you're doing that kind of signature, David Bowie hammer on pull off right there, which is not really Bowie playing that. Then after that D minor 7, you've got F and F9, G and G9, and then right there it's E major, like a little partial E major, and then E sus4 to E major right there, and then a big, like cowboy E major right there, and then do it again. up next is County Fair from Joe Walsh, and I think this is actually a Uni-Vibe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move through all of these different pedals using this riff from County Fair. So without anything turned on, this is just the regular, straight signal. County Fair sounds like this. Engaged, it sounds like this. And to my ears, the Uni-Vibe sounds kind of muffled. It has a very kind of finger in your ear kind of sound. Not really that happy with the tone. The deep phase on the 4-stage phasing setting sounds like this. Stage phasing sounds like that. And you can really hear that modulation in there. It sounds really cool. It almost sounds like a flanger. Finally, the Phase 95, and we're going to run through all 4 settings. So here's the Phase 45 setting, just regular, like this. And then Phase 45 with the script logo. Phase 90 regular. And then the Phase 90 script. There's just different shades or different colors of phase, which is really cool. Okay, up next is a very obscure Rush song. This is the Necromancer from the Caress of Steel album, and you can definitely hear Alex using lots of phase, especially those early, like the first 5 Rush albums. There's phase hiding all over the place. For the Necromancer, you've got this. Sure which phase unit Alex was using, and it might be a Maestro phase shifter. I'm not really sure. Maybe a small stone. I don't think it was actually a Phase 90, but right there with the Necromancer we've got an E minor 7, and right there he lifts off the fretted notes there and just bars the 7th fret like that partial chord. Partial C major, and then move over to a partial G major, and then just F with F sharp with that open A, and then you do it again. Now a song from the other Canadian power trio. This is Triumph, Lay It on the Line. You can definitely hear some phase, in the intro part. And I have seen, actually Rick Emmett has an online tutorial, and it's played on a 12-string guitar, which I don't have a 12-string, and he was demoing it and playing it up here. And then eventually it moved down here, on a 12-string guitar. But when I hear this intro part and that sound, or at least the song, to my ears it sounds just like this. just a 2-chord, vamp right there. It's an A minor 7 to an A minor 6. So I'm not really sure how Rick played that part. I don't have a 12 string. Maybe if I had a 12 string and I played it that way, it would sound more like it. But to my ears, that's what it sounds like. Also using the Deep Phase right there instead of the Phase 90, because I don't think Rick Emmett was using a Phase 90. It was something else. So that seems to kind of hit that sound a little bit closer. And next up is the Police, Hole in My Life. And this actually used the same chord progression we just saw in Lay It on the Line, but it's played, and arranged in a different way. But you can clearly hear Andy Summers. I believe this is a Phase 90. So I'm using the Phase 90 just, regular, not the script. But a Hole in My Life's like this. And then A minor 6 again. Just like Lay It on the Line, just a little different. Different voicings and fingerings for those chords, but the same progression. So it's that A minor 7 and A minor 6 back and forth. And then go to the 4 chord, go to D minor 7. D minor 6. Alright, for another example of some phasey guitar, check out Achilles' Last Stand from Led Zeppelin from the Presence album, and you'll definitely hear Jimmy Page using a phaser. And here I'm using the Phase 95 on the Phase 90 setting with the script logo engaged. And Achilles' Last Stand intro is something like this. Playing 2 chords back and forth. So right there in the beginning, that's an E minor 9. And then you hear those pull-offs. There we go. And then you're going to change that to an F sharp minor flat 13 right there, implied. And then do those pull-offs again. And then back to the E minor 9. Guitar part, and it ends with this. It's like an F sharp minor 11 implied, but definitely the mighty, Led Zeppelin using some phase right there. And you can definitely hear it with those chords too, the voicings. Alright, last but not least is Shine On You Crazy Diamond from Pink Floyd from the Wish You Were Here album. And there's been a lot of speculation and arguments about this song too. Some people claim it's a Uni-Vibe, some people claim it's a Phase 90. Definitely David Gilmour was using, the MXR Phase 90 around that time for Wish You Were Here sessions. And the Gilmourish channel actually did a feature where they talked about this song and the effect. And once again, that guy from Gilmourish is a genius. Like he's a, definitely an effect pedal, just guru or whatever. So I totally trust his opinion, especially related to Pink Floyd and David Gilmour. And that's what he claimed, he was using, was a Phase 90. But for Shine On You Crazy Diamond, you've got that, really brilliant opening with that G minor 13. And that really cool, swirled kind of phase effect. Something like that, which that's not really David Gilmour's tone, but it's close. And then eventually you hear the... noticeably hear that phasey effect. And once again, David Gilmour is totally playing with your ear with that song, because you have that G root, which that would function as like a G minor 13. And then you hear it change to C, which is beautiful. And that's a C11 implied now. And you really hear that like in part 5 of the song, where you got this part. That would be the G minor 13 again. But then over that C, which is really cool. Let's see, how can we do that? Something like that. You're kind of getting that C note in there. And then that would change that like an implied C11, and then C7 sus4, and then what, a C9 sus4. So depending on what chord, in that song, it could be G minor, it could be C, occasionally it does move up to D, and then you've got that E flat and D happening in there too. Probably one of the most famous uses of phaser that's not Eddie Van Halen, but I love that song. Shine on Crazy Diamond is, an epic. That's going to wrap this episode with the 1970s Phase Craze, and there are hundreds of other songs I could have performed or mentioned or flashed, on some images, because phase, as soon as it was introduced, it became very popular. It was one of the first modulation effects, and then eventually flange and chorus and some other effects, came in the picture. But there's something really cool about phase. I love it. It's one of my favorite effects. I love delay and phaser. Those are my two favorites. And I don't really consider overdrive, fuzz, or distortion an effect. That's more tone shaping. But as far as just a pure effect, I love phase and delay. Those are two of my favorites. And there's just something about the sound it delivers. It definitely gives you this kind of vintage, 70s kind of flavor, because that's when it was introduced. But I don't know, it's really cool to hear like modern music using a phaser, and whether you're using it for chords, or it could be for a solo or part of a riff or something, or just an effect like a noise. It's a really cool effect to experiment with, very inspiring. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments, please subscribe to my lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.